How do we find hope when hope is so hard to find right now? That was our member Bill Robinson's request of me when he purchased this sermon topic at the auction this year. How do we find hope when we watch so much of our progress and our cherished freedoms being rolled back? Bill asked when we sat down together. How do we find hope in the midst of devastating climate change, increased gun violence, terrorism and wars, and so many people suffering all over the world? And where is the hope when we seem to be increasingly at odds with one another as a society, and the news is constantly distorted, and our elections are tampered with? Reverend Nica, I want a sermon that will help me find hope. Right, Bill? Well, okay. Now, I have to confess that when Bill first spoke to me about this idea, I was feeling a similar sense of hopelessness and despair about the direction of our country and our world. Sorrow and outrage about what's happening have been my more constant companions. And like many of you, I confess to feeling hopeless too, sometimes, particularly over the past year. But then that's the unique challenge of being a minister, working hard to find ways to inspire and encourage, even when it's not easy. So since Bill and I talked back in August, I've made a concerted effort to keep looking for where the hope lies, even when it's well hidden. These times are trying. Certainly the most challenging cultural and political period in my adult lifetime. But this extreme dysfunction is also leading people to look for what they can do, how they can make a difference. But more than that, in longing to create a better, kinder, more equitable world, more people than ever are stepping up and are participating in the political process and in social action. Just look at the marches we've held as a nation, attended by millions, supporting women's rights, advocating for our climate, standing for the truth and importance of science, for LGBTQ rights, and so much more. We've rallied as a congregation with our Muslim neighbors to stand up for the freedom of religion. And together with many others, we've shown up at airports and outside politicians' offices to advocate for vulnerable immigrants. More women and young people than ever are getting engaged in politics and are running for office. In fact, my sister-in-law, Beth, who's a lawyer and a longtime UU, just got elected to the school board in her district in what may be the beginning of a political career, I hope. Since we can no longer trust our politicians to do what's best for the masses are stepping up and stepping in and taking action. Apathy is no longer a luxury that we can afford. That new level of activism, of engagement in civic life, is our green sprout that is growing through the rubble of despair. Just like in our story earlier, and like on the front of your orders of service, our seedling is growing into a beautiful plant despite being stepped on and pulled out again and again. We will not be trampled. The very forces that could bring us to the verge of despair are actually feeding our seedling of hope. They're encouraging it to grow. Out of destruction comes new life. Out of attack on our most precious human values comes resistance and an increasingly louder chorus of enough. Enough. That's how we push back against the forces of hate and greed in our society. And that brings me hope. I also find hope in the hashtag #MeToo movement. When it first started to emerge on Facebook, that women were admitting that they too had been sexually assaulted or harassed, I was moved to tears. The #MeToo hashtag has been posted more than 85 million times around the world on Facebook, over a mere 45 days, and in 85 countries. Now, as someone who has also suffered from sexual harassment and abuse in my life, it was a secret that I had kept to myself, something I had accepted as a normal hazard of being a woman, a secret shame that too many of us women carry, and yet one that has been unspoken and expected simply as part of our reality as being women. I was heartbroken to witness on Facebook that almost every woman I know said "Me too." Clearly, it's a reality that we'd all silently come to accept as women. Most of us have lived with these stories silent and isolated. So as all the accusations of abuse and all the silent stories continue emerging, I have hope. I have hope that the centuries of exploitation of women is being exposed in a way it's never been before. For the first time, women are publicly being heard and believed. The patriarchal structure that has kept us silenced and oppressed is finally showing cracks. So there is hope. There's hope now that things will change. There's hope that women will be more respected and treated differently. There's hope now that powerful men and boys will think twice before they harm a woman or a girl. That their actions may no longer go unseen or unreported in the Gordian knot of victim shame or blame. And there's hope now that our society will no longer tolerate this form of oppression and abuse. Do I hear another amen? Amen. That it will become the punishable exception rather than the norm in our society. Now, I know we're only at the very beginning of this, but in its exposure and its daily unraveling, there is hope. I have hope. I also find hope in the unveiling of the hidden, ugly corners of our society. Just as cancer cannot be treated if it remains hidden from view, observing the hate and intolerance that are now clearly visible shows us where to focus our attention. It shows us the dangers of complacency, the hate, the bigotry, the racism, the misogyny, and the xenophobia that has been allowed to fester for generations is now clearly visible. As the cancer of our lesser nature rises to the surface of our nation's body, I have hope that we can restore our people to health. As we all know, the first step to solving a problem is recognizing that it exists. Nowadays, 75% of Americans believe we have a race problem. Under President Obama, many white Americans said racism was dead, and it was suggested that we were living in a post-racial era. Well, perhaps one day historians will explain the rise of the current administration as a reaction to 8 years of our first African-American president. Or, if not a race-related reaction, perhaps misogyny. as the female candidate was judged negatively, certainly in part on the basis of her gender. As Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm, who was the first African-American woman to run for president, said, "I've always met more discrimination being a woman than being black." In much the same way that addicts find it hard to recognize the urgency of recovery until they hit rock bottom, perhaps American society needs to hit rock bottom. Perhaps we need neo-Nazis marching in the streets shouting Blut und Boden, blood and soil. Perhaps we need tactless, lying, white supremacist sexual assaulters as elected officials in this land just to realize how depraved our system still is. Sometimes you have to see the ugly truth and hit rock bottom to realize the urgent necessity to heal, to recover, to change. So why do I have hope when there is so much ugliness? Because all of these cultural and institutional afflictions are more and more obvious now. We can no longer ignore the hate and bigotry that used to hide in the shadows of our lesser nature. We can no longer marinate in our denial. We're no longer able to ignore the whispers in our own hearts and minds. We cannot avoid asking ourselves how we may be participating in these evils, how our own inaction or our silence has contributed to the unspoken condoning of these ills. And the fact that we need to do some deep soul searching and questioning of what we can do to cure these ills gives me hope. I have hope. I do. And blessedly, there is so much good in our midst as well. Historian and social activist Howard Zinn wrote, "To be hopeful in bad times is not just foolishly romantic. It's based on the fact that human history is a history not only of cruelty, but also of compassion, of sacrifice, courage, and kindness. What we choose to emphasize in this complex history will determine our lives," he writes. "If we see only the worst, it destroys our capacity to do something. And if we remember those times and places, and there are so many where people have behaved magnificently, this gives us the energy to act and at least the possibility of sending this spinning top of a world in a different direction. And if we do act in however small a way, we don't have to wait for some grand utopian future. The future is an infinite succession of nows. And to live now as we think human beings should live, in defiance of all that is bad around us, is itself a marvelous victory," he writes. And if you want to read those words again, they're in my newsletter column this month. Zinn's call to action and his reminder that there is so much good in the world too is a way for us to actively develop hope. Eco-philosopher and scholar of Buddhism, Joanna Macy, says exactly this in her book, Active Hope. She tells us we cannot rest in hopefulness alone. We cannot rest hoping and wishing for a better outcome without committing ourselves to action. That is a passive hope in which we wait for others to bring about our dreams for a better future. Instead, she says we need to embrace the kind of hope that is fueled by desire, in which we take a clear view of reality, express our desired outcome, and then get to work to make it happen. She writes, since active hope doesn't require optimism, we can apply it even in the areas where we feel hopeless. The guiding impetus is intention. We choose what we aim to bring about, what we act for or express. So, my friends, let's bring our magnificent, compassionate, kind, and courageous nature to bear. And I would be remiss as your minister if I didn't remind us of the importance of building our spiritual muscles during this time. We need our spiritual courage and strength to have the resilience for this long struggle. For us not to sink into hopelessness, we need to practice something daily that opens our hearts and fortifies our spirits. What is it that grounds and balances you? Do you have a meditation practice? Does it help you remember that what we are is what we listen to in our heads? Do you have a daily prayer practice? Does it allow you to hold up all those around the world who are suffering right now and send them love? Do you do yoga or Tai Chi? Do you go out into nature to find your strength and renewal? Do you play or listen to music to access your inner peace and wisdom? Do you write poetry or create art or write a journal or build something to help you work through your feelings? Focus on whatever practices ground and nourish you so we will be able to grow and sustain our active hope. So we will be able to nourish our hurting hearts, so we will have the strength to get up day after day with courage to face this reality with compassion and hope. Sikh activist and lawyer Valerie Kaur asks us in an impassioned speech, what if the darkness is not the darkness of the tomb, but the darkness of the womb? What if our America is not dead, but a country that is waiting to be born? What if the story of America is one long labor? What if this is our nation's greatest transition? My friends, we are in the midst of a very, very uncomfortable birthing process. We're in the throes of giving birth to a new, more conscious, more caring and engaged reality. But it's painful because we're not there yet. We're in the midst of excruciating labor pains, a time when we may want to scream and give up in despair. But what are we told to do as women while we give birth? What are we told, women? Breathe while we suffer through intolerable pain, right? Breathe. Breathe deeply. We are told to consciously breathe, to intentionally breathe, to keep breathing. A deep breath in and a deep breath out. Breathe with me now, because we're going to have to keep breathing. Breathe in and breathe out. We cannot hold our breath or clench until it's over, or what we are giving birth to may die. We ourselves may die. We cannot go into hibernation or give up until this difficult time is over. The die is cast, the birth will occur, and there is no turning back. Something will be born, and we have to choose what that will be. We have to keep breathing and ask ourselves, what can I do next? What can my next breath bring into this world? How can I be of service to birthing the greater good? My friends, we are struggling for the survival of goodness and peace. We are struggling for the survival of respect, compassion, and equality. We are struggling to give birth to this new, precious, more conscious and loving reality. We cannot give up or go silent or accept this as our new norm. That is how Hitler was able to perpetrate his atrocities. That is how evil wins. We must do all we can to hold on to our vision of a world in which everyone matters. Everyone is respected. Everyone is loved. And everyone has a chance. This is a reckoning. Not in the sense of a doomsday, irredeemable breakdown, but this is a reckoning. The forces of hate will remember this time. This time when we stood up, when we shook off our sleepiness, our apathy, our comfort, and we fought back for love. This time when we deepened our spiritual work, when we spoke out for the dignity and worth for all. This time when we would not rest until the voice of love is heard above the clamor of hate. Will you keep taking deep breaths with me through these difficult times? Let us labor together. We cannot do it alone, and we cannot do it without trust in the redeeming power of love and active hope. Let us live magnificently as Howard Zen entreated us to do. Are you with me? Bill, are you feeling any more hopeful? Are any of you feeling more hopeful? Good, because I know I am. And I invite us all not just to hope, but to work for our vision of a world with greater justice, greater understanding, and greater compassion. To strive relentlessly for the good, fueled by hope. To give birth to something so much more beautiful than we have right now. To something as yet unimagined. Something powerful. Something radiant. And something sacred. Right here. In this world, on this planet, not in the afterlife, but now. Can I hear an amen? Amen. May we co-create this world we dream about, and may we be the hope when hope is hard to find. May it be so. Amen.